and I started processing my own growth, and it started coming out in rhyme, and then I would go and put it to some kind of mashup of the different musics I had within my fingers, and that was going on for me and opening me up creatively in a way. But then I started to get more parts, and one of them was Barney Miller. So I did the pilot for Barney Miller with the idea that I'll take the pilot money. I'm going to go up to Big Sur, where I knew there was a place I could rent. It was the sort of the basement room. It looked out under the main deck, down through the oaks, out to the ocean. And there was nothing in that whole big space but a futon and an upright piano. I thought that's where I'm going to go, and I'm just going to keep processing my own growth and exploration. But the show got picked up, and I ended up doing the first half season, and that was a lot of fun. And so I did the first full season, still kind of thinking it's temporary, But it was during that time that I connected with Buffy, and also that I was just finding, wow, this is a wonderful experience. They were starting to write. Danny was very good at writing for actors, so the character would be part of him and part of that character, and he created characters for the people, or found ways of adjusting to what was in them. So, for example, one of the early storylines was Wojo arrests a guy in the park because he's got a flag sewn on his butt. And the idea was for Wojo to be really, really pissed off. This guy had a flag on his butt, and it turns out the guy is actually kind of does good things. But my take was with this understanding, that underneath anger is hurt, and underneath hurt is an unmet need. So when people are angry, they're hurt about something, and underneath that, now it's hard to remember that if that angry person wants to punch you in the face or something, or is saying awful things about you or your mother, but I just went that way, that Wojo, he wasn't connected to his hurt, but he knew he had people who had passed away. I made up my own mind that he'd been like a medic, So, I mean, but he wanted to be angry. He thought he should be angry, but underneath it, that hurt, that emotional pain, came through, and then they would start to write more like that. I would do something different with it, and then they would write it more like that. Danny would. And I think he came up with wonderful characters of Levitt and Dietrich, to be great characters for those actors, and not only what they could play, but like what they had in their hearts and in their minds.
Did you have any input, you and the others, into the characters? Like, for example, were you able to say, I think that Wojo would answer it this way, or Wojo would handle it this way? Was there any of that input allowed in the script?
It wasn't about allowed. I'll share a story with you that really gets to the heart of that. But it wasn't so much that it wasn't allowed. There were times when we would come up with things, improv in the exploration, in rehearsal, or something, and we might come up with our own line. But when Danny heard it, he would usually, take a long walk down to the dark, unused part of the sound stage, and then he'd come back kind of giggling, and he'd come back and he'd have a line that was just so much better, that dealt with all the different aspects that were being, brought up by this situation. So it was more working together to make it work. Out of that came those understandings. But there was a time when I keep getting distracted by my. There was a time when they did a script that was involved Ron Glass with a character Harris, who shows up on a crime scene, and even though he's got his badge or whatever, he gets shot at because another cop assumes he's a perpetrator because he's black, and he's really PO'd about it. And he comes into the squad room, and he's really upset, and then he leaves. And so the structure of the show was he's gone for most of the time. And, you know, while other storylines go on and stuff, anybody heard from Harris? You know, we're concerned about him. And when he gets back, um, the scene is he comes in and he's kind of like, you know, I'm sorry, guys. And let me say that in those days where you had the black exploitation movies, there was a lot of different aspects of the whole thing, from old time sort of racist tropes, you know, drug dealers, and that, you know, the women are the black parts for black women are prostitutes and that. But there also was a lot of ways of dealing, and you know, we had a lot of movement going on socially in different ways of dealing with that. Ron never wanted to wave that flag. He didn't back off. He was very clear on what had gone on in his life and what went on in the world and stuff. But he wanted to rise above it with his art and his talent. And you know, he didn't want to take cheap shots. But in this case, he came in and he said, "What am I apologizing for?" And for Danny and Hal, and I would say, uh, um, maybe Abe in a way, you know, people who were more connected to a time coming out of World War II, where even though there was all that racism there, you know, Jack Sue had been put into the concentration camps of Japanese people, and then he served in Japan along with a lot of other Japanese people who were their own unit in Japan, you know, and a lot of the black people who served, you know, they served in you know, they weren't, you know, there were a bunch that finally became really good fighter pilots, you know, the Tuskegee Airmen. But so there was a whole lot, but at the same time, people came out of it and got over a lot of stuff. So there was that kind of what was the Vegas group with, you know, Sinatra and
The Rat Pack?
the Rat Pack, you know, and there, I mean, if you see on YouTube things now where Sammy Davis Jr. is on with Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra, and they're kind of joking around, but it's kind of embarrassing because you know, at the time, just having him on the TV show, you know, just being socially connected, that was a step in that direction, you know. So I think there was a generational kind of thing, but there was also a carrying that Ron and there were those of us who were maybe a generation or half a generation, you know, whatever, we got it. Excuse me.